the US is now illegally occupying Iraq. So by murdering Soleimani, they've issued a warning to countries across the world not to include the United States in their regional disputes, because if you invite them in, they won't leave even when you ask them to.
Martyr Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani's physical presence can never be compensated. But the model of a moral fighter and the school of leadership that he established will for sure make up for his absence. From Palestine to Lebanon to Syria and Iraq and farther away, the martyred Lieutenant General went on a jihad streak, helping the oppressed against the oppressor and the weak against the arrogant. The axis of resistance to avenge their commander, Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani, in this following report.
كل ضابط وجندي عسكري أمريكي في منطقتنا وفي بلادنا وعلى أراضينا.
What is just retribution? So asked Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in a speech on January 5, 2 days after the United States assassinated Iranian Quds Force commander Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani and deputy head of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, Commander Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, in a drone strike in Baghdad. With no American official on par with Soleimani or Muhandis, in Nasrallah's estimation, the answer was to retaliate against the American military presence in our region. American civilians shouldn't be harmed, he said, but the US bases, the US warships, every American soldier and officer in the Middle East would all be fair game. Hezbollah is unlikely to pick a fight with the United States by itself. The group has its own tensions with Israel to worry about and huge domestic grievances jeopardizing Lebanon's political and economic spectrum. However, not wanting a war isn't the same as being unwilling to fight one. Hezbollah has been preparing for this day for decades, building up military, political, and cyber capabilities in Lebanon and the Middle East through the axis of resistance in order to strike back at the United States and anyone else who might join a war against Iran and its allies. Now, if you haven't been following the growth of the axis of resistance in the Middle East, then heads up, as it is not only Hezbollah that will take part in targeting the malign military presence of the United States of America in the region. All members of the axis of resistance will have their own part to play. The Iranian missile attack on 2 US military occupation bases in Iraq was Tehran's initial, symbolic, and overt response to Lieutenant General Soleimani's assassination. The full response will unfold in the coming months and years and will likely feature other state and non-state actors in a starring role. Playing to its strengths and avoiding a direct conventional confrontation with the United States, the Quds Force and its partners like Hezbollah, Popular Mobilization Forces, Fatimiyun, and Ansarullah may attempt to orchestrate a regional campaign of asymmetric attacks across the entire Middle East, with one goal in mind: removing the American military presence from the region.
To discuss this issue with us from Sydney is Jay Therapal, who is a member of the International Solidarity Committee in Yemen. Thank you very much for being with us, Jay. Now, a major Western mainstream media outlets have been claiming since the assassination of Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani that his loss is a grave one for the axis of resistance and especially to Lebanon's Hezbollah. Now, no one can actually deny that it is an actual loss for the axis of resistance, but is it the way that the Western mainstream media is propagating it to be?
Yes, it is a loss to the extent that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said that he was, Qasem Soleimani was the glue that held the resistance together. But also no, to the extent that the plans that Soleimani had helped coordinate for the region meant that even his assassination may only galvanize not just regional but also global opposition to the United States. As for the Western media, that depends on whether we accept that the Western media is propagating a unified message regarding the Soleimani assassination. So, for example, the same Fox News that backed the US invasion of Iraq now has a diversity of views regarding what happened. Tucker Carlson, for instance, who has a show on Fox News, has been bitterly critical of the idea propagated by Pompeo that American lives would be saved. Instead, he argues that it's going to be costing the lives of US soldiers. Indeed, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah also said that he believed the axis of resistance now had a responsibility to retaliate. And this is a problem for the US because, like all imperial armies throughout history, they are very sensitive to dead bodies coming home. That is the bodies of their soldiers. The biggest weakness for the US is that there is no unity among its ruling class about what their strategy should be. So although the US ruling class realizes that they've inflicted a loss against the resistance, they are genuinely divided about what to do next. Some people are criticizing the assassination simply because Trump carried it out and they want him to lose the upcoming election. And if Trump did this to help his election chances and doesn't care about US strategy in Iraq, then the assassination of Soleimani may trigger events that lead to major losses for the US over the region.
Well, it's no secret that Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani's strategic brinkmanship also allowed Iran to re-establish a land corridor from Beirut to Tehran, or more likely from Palestine to Tehran, passing through Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, all the way to Tehran. And other observers even say all the way down to Sana'a as well in Yemen. Now, it is obvious that all these capitals have brought out the axis of resistance and collectively made the axis of resistance possible with the leadership of the martyred Soleimani. But they each have been playing major roles in their own yards, regionally I speak. Is this force of non-state actors ready at the moment to face a standoff with the US?
Well, firstly, I think there's two fronts here. So one is the Yemeni front, which is relatively independent because the country is being blockaded. And then you've got Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. The question for the resistance axis in the Syria-Iraq region is how best to politically exploit the wave of anger against the US government and their foreign policy. The first political blow to the US was on the 5th of January when the Iraqi parliament voted to expel US troops from Iraq, which itself is a major blow to US legitimacy in the region. And officially, this means that the US is now illegally occupying Iraq. So today we heard reports from Baghdad that the rocket alarms in the US embassy have been going off because of incoming rocket attacks, which again raises the possibility of a second Iraqi resistance like the one fought against the occupation after they initially invaded in 2003. However, unlike back then, when the appetite for war among the American public was a lot stronger, the US today is a war-weary nation. As I said earlier, there is a growing perception among many Americans that the US is being used by Israel to fight its battles. Now, I think it's more complicated than that. But what a lot of Americans see is that Trump is surrounded by advisors like Jared Kushner, who's on record as having $30 million from an Israeli firm invested in his company. Or you take, for example, Senator Lindsey Graham, who publicly stated that defending Israel was the #1 objective for the United States in the Middle East. So if you go by the official story that the US plays along with, they were in Iraq at the behest of the Iraqi government, in a coalition against Islamic State that included Iran. So by murdering Soleimani, they've issued a warning to countries across the world not to include the United States in their regional disputes, because if you invite them in, they won't leave even when you ask them to.
That's what's happening right now in Iraq, definitely. And it's clear that the presence of such an axis or regional force, if you will, which has vowed hard revenge to be taken as a part of an revenge for the martyrdom of Qasem Soleimani, their leader. But I mean, the U.S. presence in the region will just not sit and watch this thing happen. What do you think the next strategy for the U.S. And Israel, by the way, will be to try and control this cross-border regional force?
Well, let's look at the current strategy of the US and Israel. Their strategy so far has been to pursue the balkanization of the region in accordance with the Oded-Yinon Plan of 1982, which was devised by Israel and greatly influenced US policy as well. the plan for Iraq has always been to divide the country into a Kurdish state, a Sunni Arab state, and a Shia Arab state. This would also expand Turkey's sphere of influence because it would reintroduce the geographic divisions that prevailed under the Ottoman Empire, funny enough. You can see this strategy very clearly when the Iraqi parliament voted to expel US forces from Iraq. The fact is that, and this is according to an Al-Monitor journalist, she says, quote, Sunni and Kurdish members of the Iraqi parliament largely boycotted the vote to expel US forces from Iraq. And this is precisely because they believe that having the US inside Iraq will improve their chances of gaining autonomy, which is what some MPs want for the Sunnis, or even outright independence from Iraq, which is what the Kurdish regional government has been demanding for years. So part of this strategy has been for the US to form an alliance with the Kurdish-held areas of Iraq and Syria by turning them into US military bases that can then be used as launch pads for attacks against the resistance axis. And in keeping with this strategy, there is some evidence that the US will attempt to resurrect the so-called Islamic State. 3 days ago, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused the US-backed SDF in Syria of releasing ISIS terrorists in exchange for bribes, which is entirely believable given that in December 2018, the SDF was threatening to release 3,200 ISIS fighters if the US pulled out of Syria. So the problem for the US and Israel is that their balkanization strategy is failing. So yes, on the one hand, there are Iraqi MPs like Mohammed al-Karbuli, for example, who boycotted the vote to expel US troops because he wants more autonomy for the Sunni Arab regions. But then you have people like Yazan al-Jaburi, who is also Sunni Arab, who commanded an important Sunni contingent in the Hashd al-Shabi popular mobilization forces to fight ISIS. He was very close to Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. He hinted recently that the people demanding autonomy were being supported by a Gulf country, his words, supported by a Gulf country, suggesting that there are many more patriotic Iraqis like him who reject the US strategy of sectarian balkanization, regardless of what their sect is.
Well, Jay, if we go back to the actual assassination of Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani, we heard a lot of analysts, whether in the US or in Israel for that matter, that say that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is the best candidate for the axis of resistance and for Iran in specific to take on the tasks of General Qasem Soleimani to coordinate between the members of the axis of resistance. Now, in your opinion, do you think this is a hint that now all intel eyes in the region are on the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, or maybe you think that this task might be actually something good to be held by someone like Sayyid Hassan?
It's not for me to make that decision, or I mean, it's not for me to have an opinion about that directly. But there's no doubt that outside Iran, the most vocal call to arms against the US occupation has come from Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. So yes, it would make perfect, natural, logical sense to imagine that the center of gravity within the resistance axis will shift towards seeking the leadership of Sayyid Hassan. Indeed, in Nasrallah's speech, he gave the impression that he's posturing as, not posturing, like actively taking on the role of a regional leader rather than simply the leader of the Lebanese resistance. He spoke not about what Hezbollah is going to do, but also about what the resistance axis should do. But whether this operationalizes into a totally new approach really remains to be seen.
I want to thank you very much, Jay Therapel, who is member of the International Solidarity Committee with Yemen, for joining us and talking to us about how the axis of resistance will react to the assassination of their commander, Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for watching, and please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideast Stream.